Hello and welcome, everyone. Today is October 15th, 2024, and we are focused on a digital world town hall meeting. Today's objectives will be to review advancements over the last week, as well as general updates within the world, so to speak, as far as updates and technologies and/or happenings. We're in a very crucial for the elections in the United States of America. We're grateful for some of those that are helping from an administrative standpoint, namely Elle and Wally today. This is a private membership association, and some of the things we may talk about may be private as well as forward-looking. So thank you for your understanding. Some of the topics primarily revolve around decentralization, primarily of centralized systems because of secret combinations, and kind of bringing that to light and then providing solutions to it instead of just talking about all of the different things that are difficult within society. So we're actually, when we talk about it, we talk about different countries and different environments and different organizations that basically impacted that. And we'll be going through some of the details here. And we've talked a lot about identity and financial systems. Here in October of 2024, you're finally seeing it happen many years after we started talking about it. And if you've noticed down the bottom, there's this IMF that's deeply involved, as well as the World Bank, which you'll hear a little bit more about from some other folks that are independent of really who we are within the digital world. But it's nice to see that folks are actually opening up to it, as well as the understanding of the importance of centralization versus decentralization and how imperative decentralization is. So with that being said, again, the basis is how can we actually find a future, not just envision a future, but help find and create a future where individuals own their own identity instead of the opposite way around. So we'll talk a little bit about real ID, world ID, clear ID, and what are the differences tied within the decentralized world and how all of those relate. For those that are joining us, there is a live audience and many folks kind of here. We'll go to Q&A here in a little while, but thing we're going to focus on initially is based around this gal here. So here we go.
Global policy push for digital IDs as the new form of government issued identification credentials. And they're essentially all based on your biometric data, which can be your fingerprints, your face, the iris of your eyeball. And the idea is essentially to collect all of that data and have it housed or have it tied directly to your digital ID. So your physical ID will be mapped to the digital ID.
This future that Whitney Webb will be describing in today's video will probably sound scary to a lot of you watching, but it's the reality of what we are to expect with this new AI digital asset future that BlackRock and many other elite organizations are trying to push on all of you. And I've been doing some research on the World Economic Forum and looking through a number of their different articles. And what I've found is most likely going to shock a lot of you guys. They're talking a lot about what Whitney Webb is mentioning in today's video. And when we're talking about digital ID and programmability, well, this is a huge topic in the cybersecurity section for World Economic Forum. You see, generally speaking, the World Economic Forum, or WEF, is actually working with the likes of the CIA, the FBI, and many other organizations for security reasons, when in reality, their plans are a lot more sinister. And Whitney Webb is going to be talking about this in today's video, which is absolutely crucial for all of you to educate yourself on, for it's going to drastically change the future for virtually everybody across the globe today. So later, we will be diving a little bit deeper into the World Economic Forum and how they are manipulating a lot of you. But first, let's hear what Whitney Webb has to say.
Digital IDs are not really a separate project from CBDCs and this new digital financial system. And UN documentation and also documentation from the Bank of International Settlements, they very overtly state that CBDCs and digital IDs are meant to go together. And without digital IDs, the CBDC digital finance system cannot exist. One of the reasons it can't exist without that is because of the KYC functionality built into this digital financial system. They have the know your customer protocols. They have to know who you are. And so they want to have your wallet tied to a digital ID and have that digital ID be mapped to your physical ID through the biometric data collection. So there's different efforts to make digital IDs either as NFTs, non-fungible tokens. There's also the efforts of Sam Altman of OpenAI and his WorldCoin project, whereby you scan your iris, you give them the biometric credentials of your eyeball. They give you a unique identifier, a digital ID, and it's inherently tied to a digital wallet. That is the same model the UN is using. They've already implemented it for refugees getting food assistance from the World Food Program. It's called Building Blocks. It's on blockchain. It involves refugees scanning their irises, and in order to buy food or receive their rations, they have to check out of a grocery store style place in the refugee camp, and they check out biometrically with an eyeball scan, and then the amount of food they have, the monetary value of that is subtracted from their digital wallet connected to their digital ID and their iris. It doesn't matter what country you're in or whether you're part of BRICS or part of the collective West. This is being rolled out across the board.
So what entities are pushing this interoperability?
One of the main reasons for this coordinated global push to develop digital IDs is because it's deemed essential to the entire Sustainable Development Agenda, which is the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, also known as Agenda 2030. And the specific part dealing with digital IDs is within SDG 16, which is about building peaceful and inclusive societies. One of the indicators of SDG 16, 16.9, calls for legal identification for everyone in the world from the time they're born, essentially. The leading alliance that was launched under the auspices of the UN to accomplish that is known as ID 2020 and has since been folded into what is called the Digital Impact Alliance, which essentially has the same funders and founders as ID 2020. So ID 2020, the UN and other stakeholders in this particular sphere often argue that the reason this is necessary is because of what they call the identity gap. And the identity gap is the claim that the lack of digital ID is preventing people, mainly the world's poor, from accessing essential services, whether it's banking, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare. They claim the only way for these people to be able to access these services is to onboard them to these identity schemes.
And so I'm going to
You don't need a fancy doorbell camera to secure your home. I found something much.
So for those that have been paying attention, this is something that is very common that we've actually seen and experienced and discussed over the years. And the goal is to be able to enable a system where all of this can be realized, but all of it being decentralized. So we know that the digital ecosystems are coming. We know that payments will be shifted from financial system that will be all digital. There won't be, just called digital money. It will be decentralized systems or blockchain-based systems that will be the new, what the world, some call quantum financial systems, some call, the reset, but ultimately, it is using key management that actually has one that's linked to another. The goal is to have a system that does two things. One, that is not centralized, and two, that uses derived keys. The derived keys is what is uniquely different within this environment of the digital world that none of the other chains are doing. And so what that means is usually humans provide three things: a name, a date of birth, and some other factor. It could be a cell phone number, it could be an address, or it could be something that's specific that links to that individual. And with machine learning and artificial intelligence, it's easy to triangulate that when it's linked to a public key and everything that basically ties to it. Today, we actually welcome an individual to the call. His name is Richard Dick. He is historically built, I would say, elements of ID. For those that are not, go ahead and pin Richard here. So those that are not aware, Richard Dick comes to, I don't want to make him big and heavy, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for some of those that are presenting with me so that the audience can actually see him a little bit better. But Richard and myself go way back, probably till 2004, maybe 2005. So over 20 years. He's also based out of Utah. Education is not even the right word for him because, when you say well-educated back in those days, it's a very different reality than what it is today. Richard has actually worked on systems that are now in the Smithsonian. That kind of gives him an age, but please do not be fooled by his wisdom and his guidance for future generations. He's a wonderful man with a heart that is really helping to build the future generations of systems that he tried to set up but have been hijacked. And when we look at this identity system and some of the things that are going in the future, Richard was involved in building what the world knows as Health Information Portability and Privacy Act, the policies behind it, which some may also know as HIPAA. So in the United States, as well as in Canada, the systems and the frameworks for all the health information systems, he basically helped to write the policy for. And it didn't start or stop there. He went on to basically help the individual to actually own their own data through consent. So if a user says, I want to have my data, he's helped from a legal standpoint to force people that have data from them in other repositories. Maybe it's insurance, maybe it's pharmaceuticals. Evans to Murgatroyd, both of those things are, secret combinations in and of themselves. But so that those different organizations or entities are forced legally or lawfully to actually comply and give the individual their own data. So imagine a world where every time you've touched the medical industry or pharma industry, or you've taken an x-ray, or you've had a prescription, or you've had some form of medical interaction, imagine if that data was actually yours instead of putting it into little silos of all these different organizations that then profile you, but they don't necessarily track and surveil and trace you in a way that's beneficial to the individual, but in a way that is actually can be used with artificial and machine learning intelligence in the future to actually suck data from you and then profile you, make you the product, make you in the center of all of it. So Richard has been one of those individuals that's been deeply behind the scenes for decades and decades. He has not only touched some of these world-class organizations and countries and systems, but he's also dedicated to building the future where the individual actually owns their own identity and data. And this is one of the first times we've had him on with us today. I'm grateful for his influence in my life as an individual, as well as just an individual that stands for truth and for right. So we're talking a little bit about identity in the future. Some of these things that we just heard on this video is something that we've been talking about for decades, but now we're starting to see it actually roll out, and other people are seeing it, other people are understanding how it's actually going to happen. But I wanted to just take a second and have him review the basis of what we call, or he called, the Maria Gonzalez issue, and where the original problem started, and then how he actually started coming up with a formula that would actually solve a lot of these issues. Now, one of the companies and organizations he originally went to is one of the largest software companies in the world that has actually been a massive part of this centralized consolidation. And so it's interesting to see how it's actually transpired over the years and how it's being rolled out compared to what we originally thought, but also how decentralization and derived keys can actually be the future that stops it. So Richard, anything you want to relate to us, whether it's Maria Gonzalez or just an overview, or I know that folks have not seen you, they haven't understood, but anything you want to mention? You might be on mute still. I was just waiting for you this whole time to come off mute, but maybe you can come off. Can I get an audio check?
There we go.
Okay. Wonderful. Go ahead, Richard. The floor is yours, buddy.
Okay. So I have a medical and computer background, and I also have a master's in library and information science. So I worked and built the very world's first total library automation system running on many computers in 1979. And worked with the Library of Congress and the National Library of Medicine and other places that are unspeakable. And the first place we put our system was in the Pentagon and some other places that are unspeakable. And so I have helped to build some of the international standards for the library world, working with the Library of Congress. Working with the Library of Congress, we discovered one author that authored materials under 67 different pseudonyms. One of the roles of the librarian is to match all of those pseudonyms back to the actual author. And that kind of thing might be interesting to the places like the FBI and so forth. And so I've worked for many years on what I call C2D2, the Composite Comprehensive Data Dictionary. And as Michael said, mentioned the Maria Gonzalez problem. We built the largest drug databases in America. It's over 300 million Americans' drug data updated every night by all 88,000 retail pharmacies. And that's a lot of data. And in building that, we discovered just in the LA area, over 10,000 Maria Gonzalez's. We were the only ones that could store their full middle names with their 8 middle names as the Hispanics. I believe that the actual personal name, no matter how many names you have or pseudonyms or nicknames, that your actual name, and I give Cassius Clay versus Muhammad Ali as an example, the same individual, but known by two different, radically different names. In identity, if you cannot capture completely and fully the full name of the individual, have you really identified them? I would argue no. So when we presented this technology to, for example, the Ministry of Health in Australia, they said, wow, this is the first technology we've seen that would allow us to capture fully and completely the full name of the Aboriginals. And I throw out the challenge because of my work in this area. I challenge anyone to come up with any name in any culture, in any language, in any period of the world's history that we can, that this will not work to capture the actual full names of individuals, no matter what part of the world. And I throw out also that we cover the opportunity, like in Taiwan, there is no written language of Taiwanese. We capture the actual full name in sound. And so it covers where there are no written languages as well. You may know that the International Standards Organization maintains a list of all of the languages throughout all time, maintained for the International Standards Organization, maintained for them by, of all people, the Library of Congress. So if you want to say this field is in High German 16th century, have at it. Do you know what the oldest living language is? It's Greek. It goes back to earlier than 3500 BC. It's changed a few times since then, but it's the oldest living language on the planet. Then you go to some place like Borneo, and they have 350 languages just on that island. Because if you look at the terrain, it's very rugged. And there are all kinds of languages you probably don't know of. So being able to capture and store the actual names, all of them, of an individual, is really one important facet of identity that most people seem to ignore. That's a little bit of more than I probably wanted to share, but it's an area that I'm really pleased to see the progress here and be a part of it.
Richard, we're grateful for your influence over the decades to help us to understand what the problem was and what the solution is. And for those that are not aware, you know, it's one thing to be able to say, okay, we've got to be able to track all identities and individuals worldwide because everyone is unique. But it's another thing to say it needs to be done in a secure manner where it is owned and controlled by the individual only. And that is what this the topic here is about. I'll go ahead and share my screen one more time and just kind of walk through an image, a very, very simple image around decentralization. So this image that we talk about so often, where instead of having a hierarchical structure or a centralized system that has the authority over others, which is really a form of slavery. And when we look at history, slavery has continued always. It's always been here in some form or another. The question is, with technology, and not just technology as far as a database goes and what we live in, the kind of the two-dimensional world we live in, but in the world where artificial intelligence and machine learning layers on top of these different data points that Richard was talking about and the gal in the video was talking about, you know, the goal is to have the individual to still be anonymous and have their own privacy and their own identity and data throughout that process. And so they can actually have their own assets, they can have their own wealth, but it can't be unobfuscated and taken from them. And so that's where technology can actually solve what technology can actually create. And what I mean by that is, in the historical world, we were promised of an internet that could actually free us, that would actually give us a voice and, you know, the First Amendment, so freedom of speech and elements like that. But what we've actually seen is quite the opposite, where freedom of speech and the voice has been perverted and controlled by the few, taking over the many. And, you know, I met with an individual yesterday, and it was very eye-opening to see the small percentage of people that even understand what's happening. And like this conversation that we had earlier, where if you layer the first version of what the internet was with artificial intelligence and machine learning, what could actually happen to freedom in the future. And I personally believe that the things that we were concerned about historically, primarily around these secret combinations, has proven to be much more accurate and concerning than we could have ever imagined. I've been in these meetings with particular organizations like the World Bank and the IMF and different countries, well over 20 different countries, and seen specifically what is happening around control of the individual. And the importance of having a decentralized system such as this, where you have your own encryption key that ties to derived keys that machine learning and artificial intelligence cannot follow, is becoming much more important than we could have ever imagined. And when people really understand what that means, is it doesn't have to be complicated. In the end, you basically don't use username and passwords. You log into a simple system that you actually own your identity. It's a very, very simple structure, simple process. And that's what we would like to report out over this last little while, so to speak. So within this last, imagine logging into a system where, this is just particularly one that I've got up. So imagine logging into a system where you would actually not use username and passwords, but a life app that you actually prove who you are without providing any of your private information. You don't need to provide your name or your date of birth or anything. But if you want to be able to register a vehicle, or if you want to be able to do the basic things around certificates or licensing or permits, or even starting a business in life. Let's say there's a simple organization with simple assets, you know, and then the rest of the world can actually view it. It is a very, very simple, easy environment. There's some new things that we're going to talk a lot about around, and a lot of have been waiting on this, but around how that links to the existing system. So for instance, let's say that you have inside of this decentralized world, you input your assets. Maybe they're currencies, maybe they're commodities, maybe they're equities, maybe it's a home, maybe it's a vehicle, but how you can actually off-ramp from the current system and on-ramp into a futuristic system where you actually are backed by real-world assets, but you can operate within this new digital environment, but you can do so in a very free way. And so we're proud to announce that some of these systems are continuing to get stood up, where you can basically purchase, let's say this particular thing is, let's say spot price here is $30 for an ounce of silver. You can buy it at, let's say, 10% over that, and you basically get not only the silver, but a digital asset that then you can actually operate within this world that we just talked about. Some of those elements, as well as legislation within new jurisdictions or historical jurisdictions that basically tie to a union that will be for the future around these different defenses, these human right defenses around privacy and the right to travel. So imagine legislation within environments that basically enable businesses or banks or insurance companies or title companies to actually legislate based upon new digital systems, the future. So those are some of the advancements that we've had. And it's not just one environment, but there's multiple environments. So this last week, we had wonderful meetings with the Kingdom of Atui, as well as the Kingdom of Hawaii, or the Hawaiian Kingdom, as well as the Kingdom of Aotearoa. And so we're physically in some of those environments today. In the coming weeks, we plan to expand an opportunity for the country of Mexico to actually be invited to participate within this Pacific Union and to formally get involved there. So there's actually some documents that will be provided within that. And then that will also tie to other potential innovation that will come after that. So those are some of the topics that are we've touched on and that are core. Any questions, thoughts, comments, or areas that you'd like to focus in on today before we convene, so to speak? By the way, Richard, thank you for being here. It's so good to see you.
Thank you.
Any thoughts from our general audience or feedback that you might have?
Would it be all right if I spoke, Michael?
Yeah, please, feel free.
Well, I can definitely say I don't have as good a credentials as Richard has, but I'm sure it probably ruffled as many feathers. But along what you're talking about with the ID, when I was in the military, I went to Afghanistan in 2009, 2010. I did route clearance where I pulled IEDs out of the road. And while I sort of have a mixed emotions about a lot of things militarily, to me, it was an important task because it didn't just affect us as American citizens, but also Afghanis. So it was an important job that I saw. But one of the things we dealt with, we had a system that we had to train for almost a year on called the Bad Hide system. And that sort of follows along with what you were talking about, Michael. It's a camera, but that camera has biometrics on it, retinal scans, finger scanners, and we would capture, if we found an IED or an incident, we would take that Bad Hide system, and anybody within a 500-meter or a kilometer radius of that incident, we would catalog all of them. So then you would build a threat matrix. So if I see the same person in an incident over and over again, then they would move up in that threat matrix as being a person who's possibly involved. But when the U.S. came out of there, they didn't destroy that information. So the Taliban got a hold of all of that. Every worker who came onto a military base, they had been bad-hided, so they had that entire database. And that sort of links in with the systems I've seen here in the US. One system that a lot of people I don't think know about or have overlooked is the AdApp data. There's a really good guy on Twitter named Tom Segura who uses AdApp data to be able to track a lot of these people you see in the media, whether it's the shooters, the assassination attempts that had taken place against Trump. They could actually find out who that person was and see who was visiting them to get sort of a pattern of life analysis. And there are certain three-letter agencies in our government currently who have access to that without needing a warrant. So personal privacy is sort of, by government thought process, has been a bygone item that has existed. And a lot of people have been trying to figure out ways to get around it. And even, cryptocurrency, whenever that came out, a lot of people had moved towards that. But watching the amount of scams and things that go on with those nowadays, I think people are starting to be able to at least clear out those vulnerabilities. But with what I've looked at, one of my dealings is within election fraud and researching it, going back to 2018. And voter rolls and voter identification are a huge issue. I was looking at one state's voter roll today. They're showing 8.5 million registered voters, but then when we look through other parts of the system, there's 1.4 million of those registered voters who are deceased that are still in those lists. So, being able to, and the only legitimate agency that we have to be able to go and verify living or death currently is the CDC. Those are the only ones that are supposed to be the most accurate on tracking the living or dead people within America. So this would be able to clear a lot of those problems out, because the election fraud part is sort of three-part. You've got the LENT, which is the equipment itself and the software, the SCIENT, which is the internet connection and the cellular connection, and the vulnerabilities that are inherent in that, and then the human side, which are not just the people that are registered to vote and voting and the placeholder of a person who votes, but also the people who work in those central count facilities who at times are obfuscated and you don't know exactly who is doing the legitimate vote count. So all of those are important components that would tie in with this.
Josh, from your perspective, by the way, thank you for service. And it's sad to see the negative effects of war and the consequences of choices. What I would hope is in the future wars that we can actually bring some transparency to the choices before they become that reality, such as these secret combinations having other agendas and control, and whether it's around money or whether it's around power, et cetera. But thank you for your service. For those that are not aware, Josh is an absolute expert when it comes to voter forensics and the history. He's done a lot of research since 2020 and even before that. But I think him joining us as a part of this body before the elections in the United States of America may be able to bring some color, and I think some poignant questions in your path may guide us. I think in the end, it doesn't really matter. I personally believe that the game has already been played. It's already well underway. The not just voting interruptions and interference, but the fraud and the realities of numbers, not just around folks that are not legal to even be in the country, let alone be able to vote, but the realities around what the systems are doing. You talked about systems being connected to the internet. Supposedly these voter machines are not supposed to be connected to the internet. I know that there's 5 or 6 different countries on this call, from New Zealand to Australia to Canada. And I don't know about Mexico, but I do know that, most of the countries that are colonial based and US based are using the Dominion voting systems as well as some other flavors that are tied to that same code base. But is there anything that you can provide us guidance on that we may either not be aware of or we should be aware of as these elections start up, or maybe something that even if it's just a data set that helps us to understand truth and transparency? Any thoughts there?
Well, first of all, you're accurate on a lot of these systems being all based in the same base. And here's what I have seen personally. I had my hands on the first instance of a black box system being public. And the way my brain works, as soon as I got it, I reverse engineered it. I pulled all the source code out of it, looked at it in 20 different directions. I even pen tested it. The system that I had my hands on, I ran an Nmap CVE scan, which is critical vulnerabilities and exploits. And I got 3,900 pages of vulnerabilities in one system that was supposedly not connected to the internet at all. It was over 200,000 vulnerabilities, and of those 200,000 vulnerabilities, over 24,000 of them were a CVE level 6 and above, which normally our election system is under what's called critical infrastructure, which I know Richard would know about this one. Obama deemed the election system under critical infrastructure, which puts it under a regulation referred to as FISMA. And FISMA for critical infrastructure has a very specific layout on how the hardware, the software, and all of that system is put together. It's how the government regulates their hardware and software to ensure that secrets stay safe. None of these systems are certified in that at all. And no certifying body has ever looked at them under that scope, not the EAC, the election authority here in the United States, nor any of the other inspecting groups, whether it's Pro-V&V or SLA. None of them have ever put it under that FISMA scope. And I'm working with a gentleman who used to be infrastructure manager for the NSA. That has been one very large aspect we've been focusing on. And this isn't just in the US. I assisted politicians in Mongolia in 2021 and investigated their elections. I assisted in Uganda in the 2020 elections. All of those used the same US-based election system, and all of them had the same inherent problems that we had, so much so that out of the 10 suggestions that I gave to President Museveni in Uganda, his final word was, let's just shut down the entire internet on election day and no one can do anything. And that's what he did. So across the board, most modern first world countries don't even use election machines. I believe Canada doesn't, most of Europe doesn't. It's all hand cast and hand counted. And, you know, guys like David Clements and a lot of these others who have been out there for the past few years putting information out, I truly believe that's the most secure way to be able to do it. And we know that it can be done. One of the excuses they say is it's too much manpower and too much time. Not when it's done down at the lowest precinct level and that information fed up. And we know that that's capable because most precincts are held to 2,000, 3,000 or jurisdictions, which are the smaller aspects under those precincts. They're kept to 2,000, 3,000 individuals. The biggest part is watching for what they would call the glitches. The glitches are important. Antrim, Michigan, you know, there was a lot of scandal that came from that. And the reality was there were 2 ballots that were created. There was one, and then it was updated and someone was removed, but they never changed those ballots out in the field. So it just so happened that that one that was removed happened to remove all of Trump's votes and move them up to Joe Biden in 2020. And so the people who caught that just happened to be able to get that corrected, but that stirred a lot of controversy. And you have those state-controlled mouthpieces, whether it's Professor Halderman, Harry Hursty, who admittedly to my face told me that he's on CNN's payroll and has been since 2012, works directly with DHS and a lot of other government agencies. All of these people are there to suit the one purpose, which is the protection of the state and to ensure confidence in a system that any other point in time they've said had vulnerabilities. All I had to do in 2018 was follow most of the Democrat politicians and what they've talked about since 2000. And most of them were accurate and correct. Most of your election systems, or the system that I looked at, the black box, and I reverse engineered it. It started in Visual Basic, upgraded to .NET 2.0, and then ended up as .NET 4.6, which .NET 4.6, even back in 2016, 2017, was end of life because of the flaws in it. And since we had discovered that election company then reverted it to .NET 3.0 just because it's IoT compliant. And we know from Michigan, I've looked at their stuff and they're getting ready to unveil cellular voting, and they already have that infrastructure set up and in place. So that's on the horizon as well.
What I find interesting is how when the Microsoft vulnerability happened about 65 days ago, maybe almost 3 months ago now, you had 6.5 million servers that were Microsoft based that actually went offline, and the voting systems were inside of that. So if the voting systems were not supposed to be connected to the internet, why is it that they would go off? Particularly all over Arizona, they were reporting it because it was being analyzed, because that was Maricopa County was one of the counties that literally threw the election, and people were like, we don't see how the numbers are here for the last 2020 election with Trump. A lot of it came down to that. And so it's very interesting to see how there's such a double standard. I mean, like you, I come from the security system world. I come from, these vulnerability worlds. And what's interesting is in the digital side of things, Microsoft really created the virus ecosystem. And what I mean by that is you had all these different countries that came up with their antivirus solutions, from Trend Micro or Kaspersky or any of these other ones. In America, it was more of McAfee or Norton. But these different countries came up with these different antivirus systems that tied to systems that were primarily tied to US-based technology, whether that was Microsoft, whether it was Oracle, et cetera. And it's very interesting to see how not only the digital viruses started within the Microsoft ecosystem, but then they traversed, and the same patterns are seen within the physical world with, you've got viruses and then antiviruses, talking about COVID particularly. And then it also happened, I believe, before that in the plant world, and a lot of the things that are happening. What's interesting lately in the United States of America, we're seeing lots of what people would call as natural weather patterns. But I personally believe that we're manipulating weather. I think we're manipulating things that we should not be messing with. And the same individuals within those ecosystems are tied to those same types of things that are tied to fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But ultimately, I think that, truth will prevail, whether they cheated in 2020 or they'll cheat in 2024. In the end, honesty and truth will become known through people just like yourself, Josh. You take the time to understand, you take the time. I mean, even others like the 2000 Mules video that was done, or movie that was done, these are people that care about truth. And a lot of people just they're not aware of it, or they just don't care. But I think as things continue to progress to get more difficult and controlled, the basic things of freedom and liberty, as they're stripped away, people will just say enough is enough. And one of the things that we're focused on, and this may sound crazy, but we build an operating system within the Clear companies, particularly through the company called Clear Center, which was one of the original companies, about 17 years old now. And the operating system is called ClearOS Server. And that CVE database that you're talking about, we were one of the ones that would say, hey, we'll go ahead and update this and make sure it's compliant. But the whole reason I talk about these viruses and antiviruses is I particularly feel that these vulnerability databases, whereas they're usually good white hat folks that are saying, hey, there's a vulnerability, maybe it's a 0-day threat or this type of a threat. But I believe that a lot of the updates are actually potential viruses in and of themselves. And so ClearOS Server, we're actually going to sunset the updates and lock them in as they currently are, and literally let the world have an operating system that doesn't have the manipulation to it. There's certain things around 0-day threats that we'll work on, but some of the historical updates and pattern files as normally done, we're going to continue to kind of wean that off, if you will. So I don't know if that makes sense, but when people start understanding operating systems and why the Clear companies are on the operating system side, and I'll share a screen here real fast. The general audience that we have here won't be able to see it, but for those that are looking online, you'll see a simple model that basically has kind of like a figure 8 on its side, where ClearOS Mobile, an operating system, connects into ClearOS Server, an operating system. And that simple model basically enables what we believe is a future where independence can actually be realized. And what you do is you put a decentralized architecture, or really some applications on these nodes within, and it doesn't have to be ClearOS Server. It runs on almost any server-based architecture that's MIPS or ARM-based. But in effect, what you end up getting is a decentralized architecture that doesn't go down, and you have validating transactions. So for instance, I'll pull open a screen here. I'll actually go back over and so that our listeners can see. By the way, Mr. Green, if you could allow some of our common friends in, that would be greatly appreciated. Just provide the URL. That would be awesome. So what I'm doing is thanks, bud. What I'm doing is I'm sharing the Mexican environment here real fast. And I'm just going to go ahead and log in as a resident. Since we're talking about voting, I'm going to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over to the main page. I'm going to scroll down to the different services so you can kind of see identity, number 1, health, voting, number 3. We'll scroll down to voting, we'll log into voting, and then we'll grab a device and actually show you how this can actually work. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab my Life-based app, which can only run on one phone and one app. You can't duplicate it. And I'm going to go ahead and select this gentleman here. So I'm basically using my Life app, knows where I am, who I am, but the system doesn't need to, so to speak. So you can see how my vote actually counted within that environment. I don't know if our listeners were able to see that, but I was able to cast a vote here. And multiple people can basically be doing this in real time, but they don't have to have the vulnerability of having non-transparent systems accounting for a vote or providing an identity. Now, in the state of Utah, it's very illegal for people to actually track the identity of people that vote. That should be something that is confidential, because other people go and profile it. So let's say they voted once, want to vote again. So I just did that, validate who I am. And you can see that my vote went from one to another. Now I could even be logged into the same system, or if there's anybody on this, like literally anyone on this meeting that has any Life app, Vanuatu Life, Tuvalu Life, Hawaiian Life, American Life, Samoa Life, Mexican Life, any of the Life apps, they can even come off of sharing another screen. So this particular screen, it knows where I physically am GPS wise, and as does the actual GPS on the voting side of the other side. And in the future, countries can say, well, we don't allow people that haven't been in the country for X percentage of the time to actually vote. Or maybe it's, you have to prove citizenship first, or others. So in some countries, it's simple as paying a power bill. But the point that I'm driving at is we can use technology to intelligently organize humanity to be able to cast real-time votes. If someone has a Life app, if you give me a heads up, I can go ahead and just pick a candidate that you want. And we can see this changing in real time, even though we're physically in different locations. It's very interesting how all these different systems can work. And then when you understand how it's being transparently verified through the process, this is one of the systems I believe will be actually the future once identity is rolled out. So some of the stuff that Richard Dick has been so influential in his life around bringing to fruition, I believe that identity, once it's actually rolled out, will then start providing the ability for voting to become very simple and transparent. What's sad is it may, in the interim, it may go back to physical voting because people just don't understand and or trust the technology. Because I would say today the technology is absolutely fraudulent, it's absolutely manipulated, and it can't be trusted. So for me, it really doesn't matter what the elections say. It doesn't matter how many people come in illegally, don't come in. The numbers, the validation can't be trusted because it's not a matter of getting the vote and counting the vote. It's how the vote is displayed. And there's manipulation that happens within the code from the developers. And what's crazy is within the original companies that did the Dominion voting system, the developers came out in front of Congress under oath and said, we have been instructed to manipulate this code. We're giving you notice. This was like in 2008. Like I'm talking a long time ago. That's, I don't know, a long time ago. So any thoughts or color on identity and voting and as it relates to any of these topics or anything else you want to discuss? Any other general questions or topics anyone wants to go through?
Hey, Michael, it's Beck.
Hi, Beck.
Hey, Josh. My name's Rebecca. I'm from Australia. And I just wanted to, I guess, say thank you for the work that you've been doing, because when you were talking about the critical infrastructure, I basically know the critical infrastructure from the back of my hand, and a lot of the systems, well, one of the particular systems that is very, very old, is very, very old infrastructure. And Michael, that was the presentation that I sent you about one of the networks that we have, and it's a very, very old infrastructure, and that is run by software, and it's around 120 years old. And the education around that particular network is very, there's not a lot of education around it because of the complexity of the linear nature of it. So I just commend you for your work, because it's really good to hear the work that you've been doing, how it ties back to the things that you were talking about. And also, Richard, the history of computers is so important in our solar system. So I just want to say thank you, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, gladly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Becca. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I would also say that it's not just Richard. He has an amazing wife that has been by his side for a lifetime, and she's just as brilliant as he is. But they're very good examples of how two people can come together and create something that is amazing, not just a family, but actually leave a legacy for future generations. So I would underscore that. Thank you from Becca to you, Richard, and just say thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Michael and Becca. Thank you.
Other thoughts or comments? Anybody that wants to?
If may I?
Yeah, feel free.
Hello, everybody. Mariano here, Mexican American. I'm gonna show you something very, very quick about elections. Can you see my screen?
We got you, buddy.
Very quick.
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect, perfect. So about fraud, this was our former president. In Mexico, the elections is every 6 years. Mr. AMLO finally won the elections in 2018, but it was in the third time that he went for president, because the first time in 2006, it was fraud, 2012, also fraud, and it was only until 2018 that he was able to be as a president. So it was. I just wanted to share that. Right now, Mexico has been blooming a lot because we have been allowing to go against the establishment, because Mexico was ruled by the same party for over 70 years, and it was until the year 2000 that another party was able to win, but it was the same people. So it wasn't matter if it was one party or another party. At the end, in the back, it was the same party. It was only until AMLO created a new party and started to doing things by their own and gathering people that everything started to change immediately. So I just wanted to share you that. That's a little bit of history, but I think that now we have the, how could I say it? The responsibility to start doing all these kind of, I will not say small, but these decentralized like ecosystems, and start to reunite the communities. You know, if we can be able to have again the power of elections by ourselves, be able to organize ourselves, and have also the power of our own economics and our money, we can change a lot of stuff. You know, I don't think that we need to wait for the governments to change things. I think we can start in our own communities and start to adopting these new technologies and start to organize the people around us. I just wanted to finish this part just like with a small thought that like how many people do we need for each ecosystem to be able to be I will not say reliable, I will say like and not profitable, like to be feasible to be used. I don't know if that makes any sense, you know? Like, do we know exactly like will be the breaking point number to be in the next level for each ecosystem? That's my only thought for now. Thank you.
I can tell you from a technology standpoint, the technology can scale into hundreds of millions without massive issue. And from an adoption standpoint, I think once you start getting within particular communities over 2,000-3,000 is when the basics of is this viable or not viable can actually be realized. And you start getting a groundswell of people talking about it. But, you know, those are pockets of communities. Like, let's say, small islands. For instance, in Fiji was one of the first areas that we did a solid pilot to. And we saw, just with a couple hundred people, we saw massive disruption in the environment. And then we focused in on a particular pilot and then just continuing to let it run. But I think a lot of it determines on what services you're deploying. For instance, if it's financial services, if it's identity services, if it's, you know, asset management, if it's license plates, if it's driver's licenses, they all kind of have their own different tipping points. 2,000 driver's licenses is much different than 2,000 wallets, you know? So I think a lot of it has to do with the geography. I think some of the stuff that we're discussing in the Mexico environment, I think the hardest thing to do, which I think is what we should actually do first, believe it or not, is full-on passports. I think we nail identity with decentralized passports, and we do it in such a way where all of the folks that are coming across the border, whether from Mexico or from Argentina or from other parts of South America, where they basically get some form of an identity system where they really can start building a true decentralized identity, because they're the lowest hanging fruit. They're starting from nothing. It's either they start from something fictitious and a straight lie, like a fake name or a XYZ, but I believe that we can walk through the front door of the current laws that are out there in America, let them start a decentralized business with a decentralized identity and get hired by that business, and then start complying with the reporting, regulations, taxations, according to the jurisdiction that they choose to live in, whether it's a state or a federal environment that has different laws. So I really think that technology can actually help with a lot of the craziness that's being, I wouldn't say thrown upon society, because again, if I had a family in Argentina and there was things that were just wrong, or in a different part of South America, I'm one of those people. I would throw my kids on my back and I would walk up. If this opportunity kind of became open, I would be one of those people, but I can guarantee that I would add value along the way, whether it was carrying things or whether it was crossing it or working hard when you're through the side of it. And I can tell you that at these borders, what they're doing is they're basically saying is, why are you here? And if it's you're here to work, then here's a social security number and welcome to the system. Go get your driver's license or go get your identity. And when you do that, you get your ability to vote, which then ties to this whole election topic. Now, whether it's right or it's wrong, that's the reality that we're in. But the neat thing is the technology, like think about if we were to roll out 5,000 passports from people that cross the border, and we actually watch them from how do they buy a car, how do they live, where do they move, how do they buy, I'm not saying buy a house just yet, but I believe that these systems can actually enable people to have the dream. The dream that America has purported is really not to be able to buy a house. The dream is to get the financing to buy a house. And I believe that if we can actually build reputations that individual owns, so FICO scores, Paydex scores. Paydex is basically a FICO score, but for a company instead of an individual. And then other things around them as an individual, instead of using TransUnion and Equifax and Experian, which is the old credit and reputation systems, they can jump onto a new credit system where they can actually start proving, do you pay your bills? Do you act? And it's really neat with what's coming in the future. Instead of being concerned that, there was a programmable money bill that was executively signed from an executive order from Mr. Biden, or the ability for cars and vehicles to be shut down, turned off with kill switches after 2025, for them to have surveillance systems with mics and videos inside and outside the vehicles, and all of that data to basically be potentially streamed into a feed. I believe that there'll be auto manufacturers that will comply with those laws, but they will not give that data away. And that goes to Richard Dick's topic. Richard, think about all the world that you've lived in, but imagine a system. And I'll actually pull open a real example here for you. So let's jump into here. And I need to share this for some of the body that's here so they can have. So what I'll do is I'll just jump down here and go into assets, vehicles. Did I logged in on the wrong system. Let me log in. That's what's cool about these things. I'm going to jump into the Hawaiian Kingdom is actually where reside a lot of chunks. Let's log in. Again, you just use the Life app, one app per individual, per phone. Very simple, very straightforward, no usernames, no password, absolutely secure for the future, super simple to log in and validate who you are. Just did. So when I log in, I'll actually go and look at a vehicle, particularly this vehicle here, and I'll be able to see information about it. But imagine if this recording was actually the data that came off of this vehicle and I actually owned it. So instead of worrying about, is it stolen? Is it insurance? Is it financed? Is it registered? How is it licensed? How can you actually dig into the licensing side of it? You can actually literally own the recordings and data that ties to it. Now, I would argue that whoever stands up and does something like this in the future, they will sell a ton of cars because people are going to care about that data that's coming off of it. They're not going to want to buy futuristic cars. For instance, every one of the Volvo vehicles is going to be electronic after 2025. And many other manufacturers are going in that same realm. And the technologies in them, they connect these vehicles to the actual internet so they can actually be controlled. The point that I'm driving at is, what if we take identity for an individual and then we take, I'm going to go ahead and stop this. We take identity for the individual, we link it to these vehicles that are in the future. So in the digital world and ecosystem for many of these countries that are adopting it, an individual can say, I want to get a digital driver's license and a physical driver's license. I want to get a digital passport and a physical passport. I want to get a vehicle registration that ties to one of these jurisdictions, and not just register it, but also license it. So I, as an individual, am licensed, the vehicle's licensed, but it's inside of a jurisdiction that I choose to be a part of, instead of just saying, you know, I'm going to go and let's say 1 month or 1 year you live in a certain state and you move to another, and they say, well, you need to actually re-register your vehicles. I mean, a lot of that stuff, when you really dig into it, these are rules that are being made up. They're not lawful systems. They may be something that is forced in a legal-based structure within environments that don't understand it. But then that's where when we talk about the specific union, where it comes into play, where you can actually have, you know, a basic human rights structure that drives accountability around privacy and traveling that actually stands up. So I think that the answer to your question is really, what are the services? Like, I would set a goal within the Mexico ecosystem, let's say 5,000 identity holders, whether that is a driver's license, a normal identity card, or a passport, one of those three things, and then it ties into credit after that. So, and that's one of the reasons why it's so fun to show you some of these things that are coming within these environments around taking US dollars, converting them to digital dollars with a physical asset, and then issuing credit based upon that. So imagine that is the future, where real world, go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting that part,
Go
but I have this small question. And it will be easier, for example, if some people wanted to have physical also identification to like print it out for them, because I don't know, some people also will love to have, so for example, I collect my previous driver license, you know, for example, I have in Mexico, they give me my permanent driver license and I just like renew it because I didn't look like when I was 18 and I did
Yeah. So
I for the first time, but I still have mine from when I was 18. So I just asking that part. I know when this is the right keys, they do not show like all the information, but if someone really wanted to have it like the physical one, it will be easier to just like to print it on in plastic on.
yeah, so physical and digital would be what is actually printed, and that's actually, they would tie it together, so to speak. There's other websites that probably show better examples of what we're talking about here. I'll go ahead and go to American is one of them that does a good job of that. So let's see here.
Also, another part, if may I, is that most of those people doesn't have any medical assistant, so they are by their own, you know, and they cannot have like, there's some like a subculture of industry here that it treats those kind of people that they don't have like social security number or don't have any insurance, and they have been flourish and booming here, but also because they don't have any form of official identification, is very hard for them to have some health.
Yeah, so one of the things that is massively going to disrupt the healthcare world and the healthcare cost is telehealth. And so right now, within not this environment, but even the Mexican environment, there's an organization out of Arizona that ties to 150 physicians that are online real-time 24 hours a day. And if an individual basically wants real-time remote help, which you can troubleshoot majority of the health things that are not, you know, emergency based remotely. So if it's a broken bone, that's one topic. But if it's like pink eye or conjunctivitis of the eye, or you want, you know, that's a whole nother thing that can actually be done remotely. And it's crazy the economics around it. So for instance, we're talking on call anywhere from costs being $3 to $10, and then the delivery of it with whole retail. So, you know, anybody, they don't care about social security numbers. They really don't even care about names. What they care about is trying to understand the symptoms and then the history and getting good context. And that can be delivered with what we believe at about $29 a month for on-call healthcare real time. So, and that can be delivered in multiple languages. So think about what that's going to do for the globe. I mean, right now you've got people in the Philippines that understand support and they deliver customer support really well. You got people in India that deliver software development really well. You've got, and there's multiple parts of the world that have core competencies within certain areas. And I believe that the internet will be the great equalizer. You know, as a parent, you don't necessarily have to have the same level of concerns now as you did even 15 years ago when it came to healthcare. If you didn't have insurance, you were very worried. Whereas to now, you know, there's a lot of ways to actually get support. And there's actually systems that are like, hey, you don't have insurance? Welcome, welcome. We're built for no insurance. And so I really see that. And I think you can traverse, you know, developing countries that may, for instance, you know, I was in Fiji and I probably did too much scuba diving and then too much flying too close together. And I thought I got BINS. It was actually the West Nile virus when I figured out what it was. But to go through and figure out what that was, I actually had to go away from the developing health environments within Fiji, even though they had a hyperbolic chamber that I went into and the doctors couldn't figure out, why are you feeling this way? And, you know, it just so happens that I flew and dived around the same time that I got, you know, West Nile virus, so to speak. Because I don't, you know, if I'm going to get sick, I just as soon have my body do it and get over it. But anyways, healthcare, I think, is one of those things that can really leverage technology to massively roll out a disruptive model globally. So I don't know if that answers your question, Mr. Green, did it?
Yes, it does in the part of like identification and driver license and all this kind of stuff. But for example, on the side of like economics, also like for example, a closed system, how many people do we need it in order for having their own like coins and for them to be able to like have commerce within themselves to be like feasible that system to rely on. You know, I don't know if I
No, it makes sense. I think what you're driving at is what is the tipping point for adoption within a financial system for it to really be viable, right? Is that your question?
Yes, it is.
And I think that comes down to programs. And I'll give you some examples of programs. And this may sound crazy and some people may not even follow this logic, but imagine a world where the future generations can actually impact themselves. So it's not old people saying, hey, kids, do this a different way. It's like, hey, kids, you want to play sports? You want to actually, let's say it's rugby. You want to play rugby, you want a uniform, you want to travel. What if you went and asked your neighbors, your aunties, your uncles, if they could give you $20 and be able to help pay for your travel, for you, for your uniform, as well as they could actually get a discount. So when they spend $20, they could get a value of $200 in discounts within certain stores. Those stores are actually accepting, let's say, a digital Mexican peso, okay? So what the kid does, the child does, is say, hey, you're going to give me $20, but I'm going to give you $5 of that back, and you're going to actually get 5 digital Mexican pesos, and then you can go to all these, let's say, 500 stores that are local to you and get $500 worth of value or $200 worth of value, whatever it is. And really what it is it's a marketing campaign for people that want to accept local currency that's digital and in the future, and they sell a local product. So not only do you get the community that's local to become self-reliant because the products are made locally, but they're also sold locally, and they're also sold with the actual digital currency that is local. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it makes sense. Totally sense. So, and that was my question. What would be the pivotal point for the community to adopt those kind of systems? For example, many people right now, they're using, for example, apps like Cash App.
Yeah.
And later on transfer those, because those are like dollars, but they are not exactly dollars, and they can exchange within themselves, and they do not need quote unquote like report but I don't know like in what level. But also, they do not generate like credit, like when they use those kind of apps, you know. Those
Well,
just build.
Cash App is actually the app that is centralized that we are actually building a competitive alternative for specifically. Cash App basically is digital money that also has a Bitcoin based element to it that thinks that there's a crypto side to it. But I believe that they are abs sold out as you can find when it ties to, reporting and then accounting and then auditing. All of it is literally within it. I mean, you can file your taxes within it if you get all your income within it. The problem is they can actually limit your involvement. It's exactly the concern of the lady that was talking before, because it totally is centralized. And so imagine a system where you can actually be decentralized, but you can still do all of those things, even file taxes, but you do it in a decentralized approach without using your name. Now, there needs to be legal precedents that says, this social security number that's tied to this encryption key is filing their taxes. And then, the key is if you're using a certain currency that has a certain tax regulation tied to it, that is your choice. If you're using another currency like the Mexican peso, that's a different tax consequences, some better, some worse. If you're using like the Dala from the Hawaiian ecosystem, or the Kala from the Atui ecosystem, or even the Ethiopian ecosystem, these all have their own ability to either tax or put a fee on a transaction. So for instance, you're paying with Cash App, you're paying a fee to get funds in, to get funds out, and then you're limited on what you can do. And if they don't like you, they can literally lock all of it up, including your funds, like full on. And you're spot on that you're not building credit while you're doing it. And I would say the credit systems are actually the credit systems of the past. The credit systems that we'll see in the future around reputation that the individual actually owns is going to be much more important and viable and valuable. I'll try and pull up in the Mexican system around credit or reputation. So imagine that you have an overall score, then you have an individual reputation score, you also have an organizational reputation score, and then an asset reputation score, all tied to the Hawaiian life, or the Mexican life in this particular case, type profile. So, it's basically credit that the individual owns. I'll see if I can pull one. I shouldn't do it there. Let's see if there's some over here, because there's another. Go ahead.
I want to share something very, very quick.
Yeah, go for
That's
it.
something that happened with one of my customers. Her credit was completely froze, and those companies asked her for her to physical mail their documents, because they cannot verify her identity, even though that they have all her social security number and their mailing address and all this kind of stuff. They cannot verify also, and they cannot do it, not even fax, not even email. They needed to mail it with a with a letter.
And
so
that-
I don't know.
And that can be faked. I mean, that's not a complicated thing to fake, right?
It's super easy to fake all this kind of stuff. But it's unimaginable how easy it is to break the system that they are right now, and to bend over all this kind of stuff. But at the end, most of those people, not her was completely legit, but the few people who are not legit, they're still paying taxes and doesn't have how's it call it? Any value of the taxes that they are paying, any reward on that.
So they're paying taxes into the system, but not getting any of the benefits, Social Security, whatever.
Any benefits at all. And every time that they get a check, income taxes, they get it out from their check. Every time.
Well, hopefully we can be a part of a solution in the future that actually adds that benefit and solves that for folks. Any other thoughts or questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Green. Always wonderful to connect in with you. Anyone? Feedback, thoughts, anything you want to discuss? Recent
Michael?
things?
So I guess what I'm hearing is blockchain is really going to be like the internet of value. I think I saw a quote from someone saying that the blockchain is going to be the internet of value. But I also see like this is going to change the tax system quite largely, which means that some of the system will crash, but blockchain really has the potential to stabilize it somehow, even if it's from different countries or nations working together to try and stabilize the economy in another way,
Yeah,
possibly.
yeah, you're absolutely right.
If we
What
understood it more. Yeah.
What I think it'll really bring is honesty and transparency, and then it'll enable choice. And what I mean by that is, let's say that you live a normal life and you make $100,000 a year and you pay $24,000 in taxes, up to $36,000 in taxes. How do you know that that goes to the roads or to education or to reservice other debt? In this ecosystem that we're heading into, when you talk about what the term blockchain is just an application that sits on a node that does consensus that a transaction happened. That's it. In some cases, it'll go onto a node that does storage instead of a transaction. And when this occurs, it provides honesty and transparency that that transaction actually happened. So for instance, imagine, for instance, like let's say in Fiji, where someone goes and pays for a hotel room, they can actually pay the Social Security or equivalent, which is called the superannuation fund there. They can pay the sales tax, the use tax, or they can pay the actual management company. Let's say it's Marriott that's running it, or they can actually pay the property owner and then other folks that would be getting paid a percentage of each transaction. That could happen in real time at checkout. And then let's say that someone's disgruntled and they want their money back, and then the money actually can be pulled within a period of time back from those vendors back to that individual. And that whole transaction is audited, tracked, traced, everything. And so you don't need to file things. You don't need to audit things. You literally the reporting can be all done. But the problem with all of this, all that sounds great, except for if it's centrally controlled. Because if that is centrally controlled, then the centralized systems that can profile that can have just a heyday with control. But if the individual's identity is obfuscated and those types of things can still happen, so it's turning the existing system on its head. So all the data and transactions are all public, but the individuals are private, versus the opposite, where anything that's happening with you in Australia, whether it's around identity or taxes or jaywalking, you don't know about it, but they know who you are and where you go and what you do. It's just the opposite. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
So I think the things that are going to happen with this technology in the future is actually very beautiful and positive for society, as long as the individual owns and controls their own identity and data. If not, then we've got a very difficult future ahead of us. So, Mr. A. Glenn, if you want to go ahead, and looks like there's something that's up there. This is a new tech for us, but if not, we'll go ahead and wrap up today as we're over time. But we'll see you next Tuesday, same time, same location, and hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you for all your support and love and prayers. Mahalo.